All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. You know why you're here. You want to get a grip on those big ideas fast, and that's what we do. And today we're going deep into something pretty fundamental. What is literature, really? Is it all about the creative spark, or has it become more like an industry churning out product for a market?
Yeah, a really good question. And to help us unpack this, we've been looking at this video essay. It's a writer kind of sharing their personal struggle with this growing tension between art for art's sake and the commercial side of writing. How does needing to find readers and, make a living, how does that change what we write and even how we write it?
So our deep dive today is going to try to break down the arguments in this video, and we want to really try and understand what it means to call something literature as art, in today's world, and why should you care about this?
Right.
So right off the bat, this video kind of starts with what seems like a pretty basic statement, like literature is art, right? And it even quotes Merriam-Webster, that whole bit about creating aesthetic objects through skill and imagination.
Yeah, you'd think that would be pretty straightforward, right?
I think.
But the video creator kind of hints right away that it's maybe not as simple as it seems.
Yeah, and the big worry they bring up right away is this idea that we might be seeing an erasure of artistic expression as the literary world gets more and more, industrialized almost, that something important is getting lost. And I think for anyone listening, who's interested in how ideas shape our world, you've probably thought about this kind of tension between art and the business side of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it really makes you question what's driving creative work. What do we really value at the end of the day? And one of the things the video points out that's really interesting is that, the desire to succeed financially, it's not a new thing, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a basic human thing.
Right.
But how it plays out in the digital world, I think it really seems to amplify the challenges for artists.
Yeah. I mean, you think about online influencers constantly showcasing, how well they're doing financially.
Right.
It creates these very obvious, markers of success, the number of followers, how much money you're making.
Mm-hmm.
And those can become the things that we're almost trained to see as, valid.
Yeah, and because art is so subjective, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the eye of the beholder. It really creates this breeding ground for self-doubt, especially, writers often work alone in isolation, and it's so easy to wonder if their work is actually connecting. Is it any good?
Right. And then you see those kind of clear, indicators of success.
Right.
And it becomes really appealing, right? If someone's got tons of followers and they're doing book signings, you think, well, they must be doing something, right?
Yeah.
So the temptation is to try and copy that formula, chase those kind of external signs of success.
And that's when the video asks this really key question, how far is too far before we forget why we started writing in the first place? And I think that's something we all have to think about. What are the real reasons behind why we do anything creative? Is it just for approval from other people, or is there something deeper, something more personal?
It's such a good point. And then, the video kind of throws this curveball. It reveals that not everyone even thinks writing is art.
Right.
Which kind of blew my mind.
It's a perspective that completely challenges that initial assumption,
Yeah.
And they highlight this view that if you're not writing for the market, if it's not meant to be sold, then it's just a hobby, just something you do in your spare time.
Right. And there's also this skepticism about making money from self-publishing. Like, it's not a real way to make a living or be recognized.
Yeah. And it almost seems like they're questioning whether it's a legitimate way to make money or if it's just some kind of fad that will fade away.
Right.
But the video does acknowledge that there are writers out there who have become successful, even getting movie deals, becoming millionaires by starting on online platforms.
Yeah.
So it's like this recognition that the publishing landscape is changing, but there's still this tension. Is it skepticism about the likelihood of success or the legitimacy of it as a path?
That's interesting. So this brings us back to that core concern of the video, right? Talking about literature as art. Mm-hmm. The pressures of this kind of industrialization of it,
right,
and really how to hang on to that initial passion for creating. So let's dive into how the video actually defines art.
Okay, so they give a pretty broad definition, saying art can be anything, a painting, a song, even just reflecting on life's big questions.
Right.
It's about taking your thoughts and feelings and creating something that others can experience and interpret.
Yeah, and they really stress how hard it is to pin down one definition of art, because it's so varied and it affects each of us so personally.
Right.
But the video does say there's this general agreement that art makes you feel something, whether it's good or bad.
Exactly. And the key difference they point out is between something that just exists and something that was intentionally created. Mm-hmm. But even something that's created isn't guaranteed to get a response from people.
Right.
They argue that it's the individual's reaction that actually gives art its meaning.
Right.
So interpretation is a deeply personal experience.
And that leads to this idea that art is meant to be shared, and the video talks about how some artists might hesitate at first, that fear of being misunderstood.
Wow.
But it also emphasizes this like innate desire to connect with others, to be seen, to spark a conversation.
Right.
Although it does acknowledge that art can definitely be a private thing too.
Right. And this leads to a really interesting distinction they make between the meaning of art, which is your personal interpretation of it, and the purpose of art, which is the reason it exists.
Okay.
And they bring in Immanuel Kant's idea that art is a representation that encourages sociable communication. So it's not just about expressing yourself, but about starting a broader conversation. And that really highlights this tension. Are we valuing art because it connects people and makes them think, or just for how well it sells?
Yeah. And that kind of explains why we sometimes see these really unconventional works that cause huge arguments, but then end up being labeled as art. Even if people are confused by them or even angry at first, it's that act of engaging with society, that dialogue that comes out of it.
But the video clarifies that art isn't necessarily born out of conflict.
Okay.
It's the different perspectives on a work of art that lead to the arguments.
Okay.
So it's the interpretation that can be controversial, not necessarily the intention behind the art itself.
Okay. And they use Jane Austen as an example, right? An artist whose ideas about marrying for love and women being financially independent through writing, those were pretty radical for her time.
Yeah.
But they still resonate with readers today.
Right. And that's contrasted with how we tend to judge art's worth now through much more concrete things, like how it's received, the ratio of good to bad feedback, how long a trend lasts, and of course, how much money the creator makes.
Right. It all comes down to numbers.
Yeah, those become the seemingly objective measures of value.
And that brings us to this right-to-market approach that the video talks about. They observe this growing trend of people saying you can easily make a living by writing and self-publishing.
Right.
Almost like it's a guaranteed recipe for success. Like anyone can do it.
They do mention that there's been a shift towards more honest and relatable vlogs in this area, which could be seen as a good thing.
Right.
But the core idea of right to market is still presented as a very business-oriented strategy.
Right.
Maybe prioritizing formulas and trends over genuine artistic expression.
So this leads to a pretty crucial question. If the main motivation shifts from creating something meaningful to just creating something to sell, can it really be considered art in the same?
That's a tough.
It is a tough. And the video smartly points out that traditional publishing isn't immune to this pressure either. They often prioritize what's trendy over an author's true voice.
Right. And that's led to this rise of what's called fast market fiction or content, where the focus is on business above all else.
Right. Pump out the content.
Get it out there.
Get it out there.
And there are even writers featured in the video who openly say their main goal is just to make money.
Right.
It's a very practical, almost like transactional view of writing.
Yeah, just the job.
Yeah. And then the video offers a contracting view, suggesting that the most powerful art often challenges the status quo. It inherently involves risk, and there's no guarantee of success or recognition.
Right.
But deep down, most artists just want to make enough money to keep creating more art.
So it always circles back to those measurable signs of success.
Yeah.
Money, fame, recognition.
It's all about that human need for security, comfort, and control in a world that often feels unpredictable.
And the video expresses this concern that we might be losing sight of what we already have. This constant chase for more can overshadow the value of just creating.
But the video isn't all doom and gloom.
Right.
They suggest that the answers might lie in the very acts of reading and writing, the ideas that come out of that engagement. It's rarely a simple matter of putting books into neat categories of pure art versus purely commercial.
Right. And they make the point that even commercially driven works can have a positive impact on readers. And readers aren't static, right? Their tastes change. They often want more than just a simple, predictable story.
And they make a really important distinction here.
Yeah.
Fast fiction isn't automatically bad.
Okay.
But bad art definitely exists across all genres and motivations.
Right.
And the solution isn't just on the writers or the readers. It's a collaboration between the two.
Okay, so a shared responsibility.
Yeah, and they talk about this perceived decline in enthusiasm for reading, this feeling that everything is starting to sound the same.
Yeah, like we're in a rut.
Yeah, and that's happening at the same time as the rise of AI tools that can crank out content super fast.
Which means the market's going to get even more crowded.
Exactly, and in that kind of environment, the video argues that the way to stand out is through authenticity. And while aiming for relatability is fine, there's a danger in focusing on that too much.
Yeah.
They predict that readers will eventually want more unique and diverse perspectives again.
They'll get tired of the same old, same old.
Exactly. And the video ends with a really powerful message that writers should write what we want, how we want, and forge a new path. using the freedom of self-publishing, but prioritizing the message over chasing trends.
So in this deep dive, we've really dug into these core tensions, right? The definition of literature as art, the huge and growing influence of the industry on creative work.
Yeah.
And the constant struggle for writers and really anyone creating something to hold on to their artistic integrity in a world that seems to value money and success above everything else.
And that focus on authenticity that the video emphasizes is really powerful. It's about remembering why you started creating in the first place and holding on to that, even when there's so much pressure to conform.
And we want to hear from you, our listeners. Think about your own relationship with creative pursuits, whether it's writing music, anything. How do you balance your passion with the practical stuff like making a living or getting recognized?
And to build on what the video said, here's a final thought. In a world that's becoming flooded with easily made content, what really makes art meaningful and lasting, what makes it stand out?
It's a question worth thinking about, both as consumers of art and as creators.
Absolutely.
So until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep diving.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.